Yeah. Okay. So this morning, my subject is Jacob, the demonization and the defamation of Jacob. Now, that might sound a very strange title to you, and indeed it may be a very controversial title. And in fact, I've been a bit nervous about talking to you about Jacob, because what I'm saying is not common in the church whatsoever. Okay? I was very glad, however, during the week, I got confirmation from Uzi Lotan on this very same subject that I'm going to speak to you about. So, the events of October, I've been sitting on this for about 2 years. The events of October the 7th have changed everything, absolutely changed everything. And suddenly this topic becomes crucial. So as I'm going to unfold it, you'll see why it's so crucial. About 2 years ago, I overheard my children, my adult children, obviously, chatting to each other. And they were discussing problems with teaching your children from the Bible. And the top of their list had to do with one of the patriarchs. It happened not with Abraham, not with Isaac, but with the third patriarch, Jacob. They said, what kind of a role model is he? How do we talk to our children about Jacob? I mean, you don't want your children lying, deceiving, cheating. You don't want your brother being nasty to your other brother. So what do you do with Jacob? And something in me rose, and I kind of said, I felt I should defend God or defend Jacob in some way, but I was blank. I had no idea how to do that. But it did set me thinking. So, as I was in the process of studying the book of Genesis anyhow, it fitted in well. And as I started looking in detail as to what was going on here in Genesis, I found to my relief and also to my shock that I had entirely misjudged Jacob. Indeed, I would go so far as to say I had imbibed an anti-Semitic take on one of the central figures of the Bible. And this had unwittingly impacted my view of God himself. Subsequent to this time, because it was so contrary to everything I knew, I did a lot of research, believe you me, to confirm what I'd seen or not. So I discovered that because of 4 things, a combination of poor translation in the Bible into English, deliberate mistranslation in the Bible, because of words added into the Bible which weren't there in the original, and because of my ignorance of Hebrew culture, I had an incorrect understanding of Jacob. So today I want to challenge you to have a different view, to question what you've always been told about Jacob. Is your understanding correct? And so the typical view of Jacob is, of course, he's this villainous, cheating brother who eventually has this turnabout in his life, because in Genesis 28, there's a ladder going up to heaven, and he starts becoming a bit better at that stage. So my contention today is that because we've taken such a skewed view of Jacob, it has a number of knock-on effects, which really affects our world today. So, first contention. The cheating, villainous Jacob character is the basis for the caricature of Jews being devious and untrustworthy, deserving of our contempt. Number 2, the identity of Jacob is so intertwined with the God of Israel, the God of the Jews, that we struggle to disentangle the two. And we've actually contaminated God's very name. even publicly in our church, to say the God of Israel or God of the Jews, you have to think twice in case you're going to offend somebody. On the flip side of this, you've got Esau. Because we've got the wrong view of Jacob, we have a distorted view of Esau. We see him as the victim. He's the victim to Jacob's cheating and underhand behavior. We see Esau as being unfairly treated by God. And we want to rush in and show him our sympathy, show him our humanity. So Esau ends up being the hero of the story by default. Now, my fourth contention is that by inference, the church at large takes on this view, and so takes on the side of Esau, takes on the side of Hamas, Islam, and the world against the cheating and underhand Israel. Okay, that's a lot to take in, and I don't expect you to take that in. I'm going to unfold. I'm going to take you chronologically through 3 conflicts. And we're going to just have a look at everything to see if we have the same view at the end. Okay, the first conflict, this is a very familiar story, was in when Jacob was just in his mom's womb. So, what do we know of Rebecca at this stage? We know she was kind and hardworking. On her first meeting with Isaac, her husband-to-be, she quickly ran to give him water, to give all 10 camels, and that's not an easy job, they drink gallons. So she was hardworking. She was very decisive. She immediately went with Isaac when asked to decide about marrying him. She was a godly woman. She inquired of the Lord herself when she was upset over the disturbance in her womb. She was beautiful. Now, beautiful, we don't understand that word unless we understand the Hebrew term. Tav is the Hebrew term. And tav, of course, means, it means a lot more than being beautiful on the outside. In fact, you could be the ugliest person ever, but you could be tav. It means that you are in God's perfect will. Your life is in God's perfect will if you are tav. And Rebecca was tav. She was in God's perfect will. Okay, Genesis 25, verse 23. Can you put that up, Morning? Genesis 25, verse 23. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples shall be separated from your body. 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So we find the twins, they have the same DNA, but God makes a clear distinction between them. God directly prophesied to Rebekah that he himself had selected her youngest son, Jacob, to be not only the head of the tribe, but to be the custodian of the covenants and the inheritor of the geographical land of Israel. God made, at that time, we can devalue what happened with Rebekah, but God made an irrevocable divine decree. It was a declaration, a decree of God through this pregnant woman, Rebekah. So bear this in mind. No human has the right to revoke what God says. Okay? And God is very careful who he gives a message to. It's not just a case of he says words and you parrot them off. When you're given a prophetic message, it's about being responsible for that message. So, and the Hebrew culture sets a high value on such dreams. So Rebekah would most certainly have told her husband about this. And in all probability, she would have made it known to her clan. So it would have been public knowledge in her clan. Rebekah took this prophecy as her life's assignment. Okay, she took this dream, this assignment from God as her assignment, her job in life. She was extraordinarily single-minded about it. If anyone, even her husband, tried to revoke God's declaration, she would stand against them, even to the cost of her life and her reputation. So, the question is, and I'm trying to plow up some of your thinking, was Rebecca the sly, conniving woman that we presume who conceived a devious plan to deceive her vulnerable blind husband and innocent eldest son out of what was owed to him? Was she an abusive parent who mistreated Esau by showing outrageous favoritism to Jacob? Was she the Lady Macbeth of the Bible? Or was she heroic and indeed sacrificial in her determination to be obedient to the prophetic message God had directly given her and save the nation of Israel from utter destruction? Was she a woman entirely zealous for the kingdom of God? Okay, let's go to basics. What does Jacob's name mean? Now, if I ask most of you what this means, 99.9% of you will say supplanter or cheater. Now we move on to the next quote, Genesis 27:36. Genesis 27:36. Is he, Jacob, is he not rightly called Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now look, he has taken away my blessing. The question we always should ask is, who made this allegation? Who made this accusation? Actually, it was the enemy and the accuser of the brethren, who is symbolized by Esau. He gave Jacob this false nickname. Jacob's brother Esau was a man who opposed God. Jacob does not mean supplanter. It is only a deviation, a derivation of that word that means supplanter. Okay, Jacob does not mean supplanter. It's a derivation of that word to get supplanter. The word supplanter, however, has been added to almost every Bible, even though it's not there in the original text. What does Jacob mean? It simply means heel, the heel of your foot, to follow after, to pursue. That is the correct meaning. And in biblical interpretation, we look at this word heel and we say, where have I seen it before? Where have I seen it before? And it brings us back to the Garden of Eden, to one of the earliest messianic prophecies. Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15. The Lord was speaking to Satan, to the serpent, and he said, I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So it's kind of saying, Satan, you're going to bruise the heel of Jesus, of Yeshua. So let me say that Jacob was a man like Yeshua. He had his heel bruised. He was vilified and shamed as he hung on the cross. He had a life of suffering and trouble, but he determined to follow after and pursue his God, to pursue prophetic truth. Jacob was unwavering in his zeal for the God of Israel. So how is Jacob described? In my Bible, which is a New King James, it describes him as a mild man. A mild man. I know some of your versions are different. He was a mild man dwelling in tents in Genesis 25:27. And that sounds like he was a gentle, maybe a namby-pamby man who's far from being a hero of God's. However, the same word, the Hebrew word that is given, is a word called tam. I'm going to go into 3 Hebrew words. So tam is the second word. Tov was the first one. Tam is the second Hebrew word I'm going to look at. Tam is also used to describe 2 other men you know very well in the Bible, Noah and Job. Noah and Job. Okay? In Genesis 6, verse 9, it says, Noah was a just, perfect man in his generation. So this is an odd thing. The same word tam is describing Noah as being perfect, yet we find for Jacob he's described as mild. Job, we move on to Job 1:1, and the same word he's described as tam, that means it's translated there as blameless. So how is the same word translated so differently? And my question to you, because when he's described as mild, it's putting his character and morals in question. Why was it not translated the same? Now, the Hebrew word tam, to give you the correct understanding, to be tam, I would be very happy if somebody called me tam. It's to realize that you are inadequate without God. And I trust that everyone here is here today because you realize you are inadequate without God. It doesn't say Jacob never sinned, but it does mean he was aware of his need for God. Okay, he lived in tents. Now again, we say, where was this mentioned? And we find we're brought back to Noah's sons. And in Genesis 9:27, we find, may he enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem. So why did God want Japheth to dwell in the tents of Shem? Because Shem dwelt in God's tent, his presence. So when Jacob was to live he lived in tents. It's describing him living in the presence of God. It's not just saying he lived in a tent under a piece of canvas. He lived in the presence of God. He was sensitive to God. He loved what God loved. Whatever was precious to God was precious to him. Whatever God valued, his covenants, his election, his values, his plans and purposes, his kingdom was important to Jacob. Now Esau, who was he? He was a skillful hunter, a man of the fields. The only other man described as a hunter in the Bible is Nimrod. Nimrod is the great-grandson of Noah and the grandson of Ham. You find him in Genesis 10. He was a mighty hunter before, or it could be against the Lord. He is infamous as the founder of Babel City, infamous as for building the Tower of Babel. He was infamous for his defiance and stand against God. In biblical parallelism, Esau was associated with Nimrod, a man who was opposed to God and treacherous. He did not love what God loved. Whatever was precious to God was not precious to him. So we find Esau devalued anything that had to do with God. And the Esau's of this world did and do everything possible to destroy God's kingdom plans. So my concern is today that the world, but more particularly the church, sees Esau as the victim hero who was abused by his bullying brother. Esau accused his younger brother of the very thing he was guilty of. It was Esau who tried to supplant his brother of his elected position as the guardian of the covenants and the inheritor of the land of Israel. So this sounds familiar today to our news today, doesn't it? Hamas accuses Israel of genocide against Gaza, of occupying the position in their land of Israel. It's pure myth. So Hamas accuses Israel of what it's guilty of themselves, and foolishly the world and the church agree with their blatantly false narrative and accusations. Okay? Now I'm going to move on to the second conflict. In Genesis 25, 29 to 33. This story has always been told in terms of, it's couched in terms of Jacob cheating Esau out of his birthright. And it's so familiar to us, we're blinded to it. I was certainly blinded to it because I had no idea of the context. Let me tell you the context, the Jewish context. This event occurred at the time the family were mourning Abraham's death. Abraham had died. There is unanimous agreement among the Jewish sages that Abraham had died at this time. The twin boys were 15 years of age. If you work it out, it takes a little bit of work to work it out. They're 15. They were sitting in a 7-day mourning period. In Hebrew, in the Jewish terms, it's called sitting Shiva. You sit at home for 7 days and your family, friends come and offer their condolences to you. There's customary food you eat during this time. You eat round food. You've got to eat eggs or lentils. So hence, the lentil stew is mentioned. And the lentils and the round, they're expressing the cycle of life, of death and birth. The immediate family, as part of this Jewish tradition, the immediate family is prohibited from cooking. So Abraham's wife and daughter-in-law, they weren't allowed to cook. They were given a break so they could properly grieve. But the grandsons, just a little step removed, they were not considered immediate family for this grieving. The eldest grandson, he was expected to honor his granddad by cooking. However, he had gone off. He hadn't bothered to sit Shiva with his family. He was entirely disrespectful to his grandfather and to his family. And he arrived late for this sitting Shiva. So Jacob, rather than being the pushy one to push his brother out, he'd taken on this duty and responsibility, not to be pushy, but to fill in the appallingly disrespectful behavior of his brother. Now, so that's quite a lot that I'm saying, isn't it? So we need to see what is God's evaluation of the situation. Did God attribute any blame? Did God attribute anything evil to Jacob? Let me assure you, God did not give one word of admonition to Jacob. Not one word. But God makes an evaluation of Jacob, of Esau at this time. And in Genesis 25, verse 34, God's evaluation of Esau says, "Thus Esau despised his birthright." Thus Esau despised his birthright. So God unequivocally attributes blame to Esau. And in the New Testament, this is confirmed in Hebrews 12, verse 16. Hebrews 12, verse 16 says, "Lest there be any fornicator or adulterer or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright." Okay, so the words of fornicator and profane, they're quite shocking. So how is Esau a fornicator? And the scriptures tell us he chose pagan wives. And we think, oh, we don't think anything of that. He chose 2 Hittite women, for starters, and then he tried to improve matters. He married one of Ishmael's daughters. But it wasn't an improvement, we're told. Let me tell you, the immoral and godless carry-on in Esau's home, the immoral and godless carry-on in Esau's home was a continual source of grief to Rebekah and her husband. Okay? It was a grief because of their godless behavior. His choice of wives, pagan wives, was not only his disobedience and dishonor of his parents, but showed his contempt for what it meant to be the heir of the covenants of God, which God gave to his granddad. And if you want a really deep dive, if you look into Esau's genealogy, which I have done in Genesis 36, you will find Esau's genealogy shows massive idolatry, intergenerational incest, gender fluidity, right? What we have today. It even shows genetic interference. It's quite extraordinary. There's fornication and profanity all over Esau's family. Now, moving on, the third conflict, the blessing. The blessing. Genesis 27, 1-3. Genesis 27, 1-3. Now it came to pass when Isaac was old, and his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau his older son, and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." Then he said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore take your weapons, your quiver, bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me." Now, let's just look at that. First of all, this begins not with Jacob. This begins with Isaac. Isaac precipitated a crisis. We think of Isaac, I always thought of Isaac as being the really good guy. But here he's precipitated a crisis by an ill-timed and unholy action. He set out not only to undermine, but to revoke God's divine decree that Jacob was to be the inheritor of the covenants. Rebekah and Jacob had one chance, and only one, to respond quickly to avert the horrendous consequence of Isaac's unholy action. The awful consequence, have you ever thought this through? If Esau had inherited the blessing instead of Jacob, the Jewish Messiah would not have come. The Jewish Messiah, Jesus, would not have come. The door to Israel's salvation would have been firmly shut. The door to salvation for us Gentiles would have been shut. God had only one formula for the redemption of humankind. It was through Israel, through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that the Jewish Messiah was to be born. There wasn't a number two plan. I believe that both Rebekah and Jacob knew what was at stake here. And it wasn't just a matter of family relationships. Oh, our family's just going through a tough time here. It was about God and his program for the redemption of humankind. The future of an entire people called Israel was at stake. Why? God had repeatedly told Abraham he would be the progenitor of a great nation, which would be a blessing to the world and the vehicle of salvation for mankind. It would have violated the will of God for Rebekah and Jacob to stand back and do nothing while Isaac and Esau usurped God's program and purposes. That's quite a statement, isn't it? Now, I have to explain this a bit. First of all, God evaluates Isaac. He says his eyes were dim and he couldn't see. Now, we look at that as physical eyes, and I'm sure he may have had a problem at that age with his eyes. But the word here is not used, the word is ra. It's not for physical eyesight, it's for spiritual eyesight. His spiritual eyesight was dim. He could not perceive spiritually. He'd lost his revelation. The man who had once had revelation from God has lost it. He's turned aside. He's lost his way. He's backslidden. So his eyes were dim. That means he'd gone away from God. The Bible, or the Torah, refers to Esau as being Isaac's older son rather than his firstborn, that is very interesting, because the Bible did not regard him as the firstborn son. He's lost that right. The Bible regards its own word that Jacob would be the firstborn as the truth, not what Esau had come up with. And God had also regarded the sale of the birthright as valid. Okay, the next point. Isaac says to Esau, he wanted to give him his innermost blessing. So, right there and then, Esau had the opportunity to confess what he'd done to his dad. He could have said, listen, Dad, I need to tell you something. This is very awkward, and I'm a bit embarrassed by this, but I have to tell you this. I must be honest with you. He did not confess his sin before his father to say he'd sold the birthright. His silence showed his deceit, his shame possibly, but his deceit. He was going to say, well, my dad thinks this, I'm going to go along with it. Another question. This is quite hard to take in. I'm giving you all sorts of things here. Would Jacob have done this off his own bat without his mum? Emphatically, Jacob would not have done this left to himself. For starters, he wasn't even aware that his dad had decided to give the inheritance to Esau that day. But when Jacob got up out of bed that morning, he didn't say, today I'm going to deceive my dad. I'm going to trick my dad. He did not do that. It wasn't in his head at all. There was no forethought for him in that at all. Now, the culpability, the blame for deception is always placed on Jacob. It was entirely his mum's strategy, actually. Entirely his mum's strategy. And for Rebecca, it wasn't a last-minute idea. She'd even put some clothes aside, specifically for the opportunity, for this opportunity. It says she gave the lentil stew into his hands. In other words, kind of go and do it. She was trying to kickstart him. So, what we need to think about, how did Rebecca know about this? There's only two ways Rebecca could have known that Isaac was going to do this. Had God tipped her off to this? Had God tipped her off that Isaac was planning to do that day? Or was she a naturally copped-on wife who could figure out her husband, who could predict her husband? And the bets is open either way. But either way, this was she predicted her husband's action. In Genesis 27, verse 12, we can see Jacob's a bit hesitant about going along with his mom. He didn't have any doubts about the decree. His motivation was the will of God, but he was concerned, however, that his dad might appear to be deceiving his dad. And that was alien to him. But he knew his brother was the real deceiver, because he knew that his brother was claiming the birthright blessing that he'd already relinquished without a second thought. Okay, in Genesis 27:13 it says, but his mother said to him, your curse, my son, be upon me. So Rebecca was prepared to take the full moral responsibility for her plan. Another example of her character and strength. She was prepared to be judged by God and to defend her actions before him. Her desire to see God's program proceed against all odds overrode all her actions. And the last point I'm bringing about that is Genesis 27, verse 20. Isaac asked Jacob how he'd gotten everything done so fast. And Jacob replied, because the Lord has brought it to me. Now, we just think, it was serendipity. It was just, he happened to be. But the word in Hebrew is kara, kara, and anytime you see this word kara, it's got a special meaning. It means God was orchestrated it, he engineered it. It was a very deliberate thing from God's hand. So Jacob was telling the truth then. Okay, so Rebecca felt that human intervention was warranted to bring about God's plan. Zeal for God's kingdom motivated her. Jacob understood his mum's zeal for God's kingdom. And because he trusted in his mum's judgment, Jacob complied with his mother. Okay, so the plan to ensure Jacob received the blessing from his dad was entirely Rebecca's. Both Esau and Isaac and Esau sinned against God. They tried to violate his decree. They did all in their power to defy God's program and agenda. So I'm going to just move on from here. There's a puzzling statement which everyone brings up when you talk about this. Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. It's in Romans 9:13. Paul mentions it, Romans 9:13. Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Malachi mentions it in Malachi 1:1. In our just to explain, our Western understanding and the Hebrew understanding are entirely different. In our Western Greek-based culture, loving and hating has all got to do with affection and emotion. And to our Western mindsets, it means God showed great affection and warmth towards Jacob, and he really intensely disliked Esau. And this makes God sound unfair and horrible. It turns Esau into a victim of abuse by a nasty God. In the Hebraic culture, it's very different. To love, either way, is about obeying and agreeing with God. It's about loyalty to God, seeking God's good, even to your own cost. Jacob demonstrated his love towards God by being utterly loyal to him, by honoring him, putting his own needs above his own needs and desires. And there's a verse I would apply to Jacob from Proverbs 8:17. Proverbs 8:17. I love those who love me, and those who diligently seek me find me. So Jacob loved God, God loved Jacob. It was a tight relationship. The flip side of the coin, though, Esau demonstrates the corollary of this. His life was in disagreement with God. He was contemptuous towards God. He was profane. He profaned God at every opportunity. He always put his own needs and desires first. So Jesus compares what he expects of our relationship to him as against other close family. In Luke 14:26 and 27, it says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, even his own life, he can't be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me, he cannot be my disciple. So Jesus isn't telling us, listen, I want you to be mean and nasty to your own family and to intensely dislike them. He's saying we've got to be loyal to him. Our relationship to him must trump every other relationship. That's what he's saying. Okay, to sum up, we're here in this room because we take God's word seriously. We've got to rid ourselves of this criminal demonization and defamation of Jacob's character. Otherwise, we fall into the trap of demonizing and defaming Israel and the Jews. This demonization of Israel has escalated out of all proportion to facts on the ground. Jews are being accused of genocide of Gazans. Jews are being told they're not fit to live, let alone have a country of their own. We hear the mob in the streets in Dublin calling to murder Jews on our streets. From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, is a call to murder Jews. They're calling out for the liquidation of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. They want a new world order that is Judenrein, that is Jew-free. As I conclude, I want to return to my original contention that we've taken on such an untrue and skewed view of Jacob. It has a knock-on effect of giving us a skewed view of Israel and the Jews. Our presumption that Jacob is the villain and Esau is the victim hero is entirely the opposite to God's truth. I realize it's highly controversial, as this presumption is so integral to Christendom, but I felt an urgency to bring this message now. We must know, we have to realize, we have to get in right position before God. Jacob was a man who realized he was inadequate without God. He was zealous for the kingdom of God, his covenants. We must rightly position ourselves towards the people, the land, and the God of Israel. Esau was a man who tried to cheat and supplant his brother out of his inheritance. He not only doesn't care about the God of Israel, he openly mocks him. He's the beast who is rising up right now to head up the unholy alliance of Islam, the world, and the section of the Gentile church which hates the Jews. That's it.